Hello there, whoever you are, wherever you are, whenever you are. It's Addison here from the Pod of Many Things. Welcome back. I hope you're well. Today I'm here with Laurie O'Connel, who is a indie RPG creator, and we're going to be talking about the two products that they've made, which is Hieronymus, which I've had the pleasure of playing with my friend the Flickering Torch. Ben, that's your one for today, hopefully. Yeah, I keep giving him free promotion, Laurie. I'm sorry, I can't. I've got to stop doing that. He's got to stop paying me. And Lichcraft, which was recently kickstarted, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
So before we do any of that, though, let's hear from Laurie. So Laurie, tell us about yourself. Tell us about your background in tabletop RPGs. Why you're now creating stuff like that. Give us the Laurie blurb, basically.
All right. Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me on. I always love kind of chatting tabletop with people. So I've been designing RPGs for just under a year now, playing them obviously for much longer. But I'm most known for a game called Hieronymus, which I love saying I'm most known. It sounds really pretentious. A few people know me for a game called Hieronymus. Which has been, really an exercise in how to spell one word 12 different ways in your game text. And that's a game about kind of the art of a medieval artist called Hieronymous Bosch and the end of the world. And I also recently put on Kickstarter a game called Lichcraft, which is this RPG about trans necromancers in dystopian Britain. So I'm sure, as you can see, there's a very strong through theme of something ? In my work. Maybe we can kind of pick that out as we go onwards. Yeah.
Yeah, so apart from obviously your own tabletop RPGs where you've made these, like Hieronymus is using the Forged in the Dark system, and Lichcraft kind of has a similar sort of it's not quite, when I'm reading through it I'm trying to pinpoint what sort of system it is, because it looks a lot like Forged in the Dark at points. And at other points, I'm like, but that's not how that works in that, and because it's got stats and everything. So I was like, how apart from those, what are your other backgrounds in what we would deem the traditional tabletop RPGs? Have you played lots of Dungeons and Dragons? Are you more a Pathfinder person? Do you like the Witcher RPG and stuff like that? What are your staple RPGs that you always play?
Well, I might lose my indie badge here, but I mainly GM for Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. That's where I started.
Yeah,
I've been GMing for it for several years now, but I kind of have a rule that I will never look at it. I don't make content for D&D 5th edition. It's the one game that I try not to look at as a designer, because I want to keep enjoying it. I want to keep enjoying playing it. And when you're a game designer, or when you design games, sometimes you start to pick apart games, and it's quite hard to just play them and enjoy them. So I play a lot of 5th edition, but I don't design for it at all. I also, with Lichcraft, it was inspired by Forged in the Dark. I would describe it as like a rules-light, really rules-light Forged in the Dark system. But it's also inspired by lots of indie games like 6th edition, which is by John Battle, who you should all look up if you haven't heard of it. Yeah. And it's a really excellent kind of more, I suppose, kind of a more traditional RPG. It's got the kind of traditional stats-based system, but it puts some really interesting, cool twists on it. And so I based a lot of my philosophy on RPGs on that game. It was a big inspiration to me.
That's probably why I was really confused, because I could see the Forged in the Dark veins, bits, and then because I've never heard of 6th edition, and so I'm looking at the system, I'm like, that doesn't fit, and I'm trying to figure out how. So now I see that, I'm like, Oh, okay. Ah, I've got you now. Like, there's something else at work here, not just the the obvious thing of Blades and Forged in the Dark. Blades in the Dark is one of the games you play with Forged in the Dark, but I get that, and that's really cool. That you and I can understand the D&D point as well. Like, you don't take your well, I did, so I'm a bit hypocritical, but you don't take your hobby to work, sort of thing. Like, you don't do something you love if you don't get paid for it. Oh, but as a teacher, I took Dungeons and Dragons too, like the school, and ran the club for a bit. So, but I get that, because I can imagine that being a designer is quite like almost like exhausting when you look at it in that way, because you've got to examine it from like so many. You've got to extrapolate it, and then you've got to examine it from multiple angles. Like, what's the player angle versus what's the game runner's angle? Because you've got GMs and DMs, obviously. So, like, depending on the game, so the game runners, the storyteller's perspective, is that true? Is it an exhausting like thing to look at an RPG as a designer?
I think, well, it's a little bit complicated, right? Because GMing on its own, we all know that it's a little bit anxiety inducing. A little, like, it's very enjoyable, but it's already quite, stressful, because you want to make sure that everyone is having a good time. And then if you're also like looking at a game that you've built as a designer, or that you're kind of hacking and thinking about a lot, that kind of adds an extra layer to it. And for me, it's not so much that it's exhausting, but it's easy to lose focus. It's easy to start thinking about your designs or your hacks in the middle of a game, which probably isn't really what you want to do. Dungeons and Dragons, I don't want to. I don't want to plug it too much, because those guys have plenty of money. But
Yeah.
one thing is that it does have a lot of design flaws, but it is also just straight up incredibly fun to play. And if you don't think about the design flaws, and if you just like get stuck in and then enjoy yourself, like with any game, you're going to have a much better time than if you start thinking about how you can improve it. Because, it's not really possible to achieve perfection at the end of the day, and you're just going to stress yourself out.
Yeah, definitely. And I think when it comes to the Dragon game, there's so many moving parts, because there's so many rules and stuff like that, and so many rules that contradict and go together and do different things, that I can imagine that as a designer, that's a fucking jungle to like carve through. Like, what? So there's this rule that does this, but then this rule kind of does the same thing, but not like. So would that be the truth, or are you just generally like, fuck this conversation, I'm out, I don't want this? Like,
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't think about the design of the Dragon game a huge amount, precisely because I kind of try and keep it as just the thing that I do for a hobby. I spend a lot of time thinking about the stories I'm trying to tell, and not a lot of time thinking about how the game really works. But I think one of the things about it is that what makes it so powerful, I don't think, is so much the rules as like the massive amount of like cultural memory and kind of like understanding. And everyone has a story. Everyone has a thing that they love and a thing that they hate. And it's kind of part of the sort of collective knowledge that people have. I love more games to kind of have that. But I do think one of the really cool things that the indie scene does is that it takes a step back from that and thinks about games as games rather than as like this huge conglomeration of like, I guess, experiences and kind of cultural baggage and decades of RPG culture evolving. A lot of indies kind of take a step back and they're like, actually, I want to design a game that's about me and about my thoughts and the mechanics that I've come up with and the experience that I want my players to have. And it's a very different approach, which I find really refreshing.
Yeah, no, that I can definitely see that in your games that you've designed, that there's a story and a way you think that you're trying. Well, I think anyway. Like, I could be wrong and I could be over analyzing, because I'm an English teacher, so I analyze everything, like word placement, imagery, stuff like that. I analyze everything, but like, I feel as though with indie games, like there's more of a freedom to express those sorts of thoughts and opinions and feelings, rather than with Dungeons and Dragons and stuff. It is about that experience that is like because one of the things about Dungeons and Dragons as well, it's never my character did this, it's I did this, and I talk about this a lot to people. So like that collective, like this happened to us, that involvement of the self, even though it wasn't you, sort of thing, is really powerful. So that like baggage and that like collective consciousness and like memory bank, as you were like, is really powerful. So yeah, that is really interesting. And I think the indie scene's only blown up because of like the opening up of like tabletop RPGs to people from lots of different backgrounds and stories. Would you say that's true, that it's mainly because of what I see as, and this might be just because I'm not, this is like my first foray into like the indie scene, really. It's like it's a lot of like almost like underground and subculture stories. Like your Lichcraft has like the transgender queer element to it, and then other like Mecha Hack by Matt Click, who's a friend of ours, is about like that anime like subgenre of mecha and that love of like model building and stuff. Do you think it's because of the fact that we're opening the doors in tabletop RPGs, that we're getting all these stories now?
Well, I think what I will say is, the indie tabletop scene is old. It's very old. People have always been designing like, D&D has never been the only game on the block.
Oh yeah.
People have been designing indie RPGs for ages. But I think like there's been a really big kind of surge of interest in it because, tabletop RPGs have got a lot more popular. And, I know a whole load of people who've come to indie RPGs through D&D. But it does, so far, it hasn't seen the same like huge swell that D&D has, because a lot of people kind of only see D&D and they see that reference. And it's very hard to kind of break through that. And that's something that would probably change when more kind of major tabletop like publishers and like podcasts and journalists start talking about the indie scene a little bit more, which is something that's developing. I know Dicebreaker does a lot of really good articles about indie stuff at the moment, but platforms like Polygon are still like a little bit behind. But I think we will hopefully see that changing, because I honestly think that the indie scene is where all of the most interesting, like, and not from me, I'm not trying to be arrogant here, but the indie scene is where all of the most interesting thought about RPGs comes from. And even if you're someone who enjoys playing like the bigger mainstream RPGs, you can learn a lot from indie game design.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Indie games.
We've been talking about like things we'd steal from certain indie games. So even though it's like big, it's getting bigger now with like people like Outside Xbox and Ox Venture doing like Blades in the Dark now. Blades in the Dark seeing like quite a rise. Like we love the idea of flashbacks. Like flashbacks to set things up is like such a cool mechanic. And like even in like Hieronymus, with like that idea of you relieve stress by doing things that do relieve stress, like crazy things that like releasing all that pent up energy. So that I think that there is like things that we can take from those games. Like I've recently just backed Good Society on Kickstarter, the reprint of Good Society, because I love Jane Austen novels, pretentious English teacher, and like just like that, just being there, like, oh my god, I get to be Mr. Darcy. Like that's like the best thing ever. So yeah, we can definitely learn a lot from the indie scene. So I do want to look at your two games that one I've played and one I've only read, but I do want to play it quite a lot. So we'll start with Hieronymus first, because that's the one I've got the most experience with, and I can ask you like questions based on our play and stuff like that, and you can berate me because we got the rule wrong when we played it, and then Ben made a whole video about it, and then you were like, and then you literally came on, were like, you got that wrong, and we were like, oh no, this is embarrassing. But So Hieronymus is a hex crawl Forged in the Dark RPG, tabletop RPG, where you're being chased by this Cthulhu-esque cosmic entity called the Traveler.
The follower, yeah, but the Traveler works.
Yeah, the follower, and basically there's a countdown to Doomsday clock, where basically if that clock fills, the follower gets you, and your adventure ends. And the clock fills in many different ways, such as doing sinful things to relieve stress. If you get stuck on a hex for too long, I think is one of the things that and then other things like if you cause like chaos somewhere, like anyway, that's not to relieve stress. Which is interesting because I'll tell you the character I played in a moment. But the first thing I want to ask is, so you told me before we started that you were an archaeologist, and like, so you obviously have a vested interest in history. Is that why you chose Hieronymus Bosch? Is there a particular reason you chose Hieronymus Bosch? Because I'm literally playing this game and Wikipediaing this dude. Like, what is this? So, like, can you like enlighten me to that? Because that is really niggling in my mind.
Yeah, so I mean, for people who don't know Hieronymus Bosch, he's this really zany kind of medieval artist who drew a lot of images of kind of hell and human sin and these really kind of weird creatures and sort of strange landscapes that really wouldn't seem out of place in like surrealist art today. Like you look at Hieronymus Bosch and you're like, this is modern art. Or like this is a cartoon, like this is a crazy cartoon. I'm just gonna close my WhatsApp, sorry, because it's pinging me and that's gonna be annoying. But I actually chose him not because of my archaeological background, but because he's almost someone whose art I really admire and kind of speaks to something about, like, again, I like to tell stories which kind of speak to feelings and experiences people are having today. And Hieronymus Bosch was like writing basically during the death agony of feudalism. He was painting basically during the death agony of feudalism. And his paintings are like basically a ruthless critique of all of like the institutions of feudal society. Like he has these paintings with these like priests, but they're actually pigs, and they're like looming over this guy on his deathbed, getting him to like sign over all his property. And like they're almost caricatures, and I've got no idea how he got away with it without being like burned at the stake or something.
Some of it's pretty racy and raunchy. Yeah, you're like going through it as a player, and you're seeing like we had the one where there's the strange like butterfly people, and the machine that's turning like people into like beast men. Like they've got like the heads of cows and stuff, because they go in like this weird like woman who like absorbs them and then spits them out of her mouth. It's like this weird clockwork machine. And yeah, like you're a bit there like, ooh, this is weird. And like when you think about when he's painting,
I mean, it's art that like reflects the whole world in this state of like chaos and disarray. And you know, that's not unlike the world that we live in today. I think I put like an extract from an article about Hieronymus Bosch at the beginning of Hieronymus for that reason. That basically points out that, you know, all of these experiences of people living through the death agony of feudalism and thinking like, oh God, the world must be ending. Nothing is as it used to be. Like, we don't understand anything and everything is changing around us. Everything feels turned on its head, is an emotion that a lot of people are feeling now as well. And that's kind of what inspired me. You know, Hieronymus Bosch was like almost a revolutionary artist. He wasn't afraid to kind of show things for what they really were. And that's kind of why I admire his art so much, to be honest.
Yeah, no, it is really like pretty, and it's if I had to go through any paintings as like some sort of like weird adventurer, like I think his paintings would work. So I played the Scoundrel in ours, and I basically played in a way, because you get like these weird. You get like a list of items. I think you get 3 that you can like that you like come into this world with, and I managed to like wrangle it so that reason why my guy had a rope was because he just escaped the gallows and he still had the noose around his neck. Like I played like scoundrel to like the nth degree because
perfect.
I thought that like he was like ha ha ha, like kind of like serial killer-esque, like I will just do what I want to do because of the fact that like the world is messed up. And I was looking at the characters. Was that what was intended? Like with because you've got like these character cards that don't actually have a lot of information on them. Usually you have like character cards with like name, like where you grew up, and yours are like literally just scoundrel. I think one's alchemist or chemist or something. You've got well, let's find the player cards. You've got the alchemist, the priest, the scoundrel, and the artisan. Was that the intention to like have it so that they're just these like archetypes that you don't really bond with, because obviously they're the aim of the game is to die, unfortunately. Like, but like it was that the design choice so that you don't get too attached to them, or was it actually like, no, I want you to play these archetypes to like the nth degree?
Yeah, I mean, like on the character cards, there's not even space to write a name,
No.
which I mean was partially a deliberate design choice, and partially I really wanted to make them like make them able to make into bookmarks.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I pared down a lot of information, but yeah, it's really about you're not just embodying an individual person. You're playing the institutions of feudalism, almost all of the archetypes of feudal society in its collapse. Kind of, you're really supposed to ham that up. So like with the priest, you're not just playing like a priest. You're playing like the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
An archetype in all of its kind of like corruption and domination of society in feudal times. And you can obviously, you're still playing an individual character, you can still play it how you want, but the aim is to have people be kind of informed by these archetypes very strongly. When you're playing a scoundrel, you're playing like all of the dregs of society, all the people that have been like let down or have decided that like feudal society isn't for them, you know, all of the ones that kind of like going against the grain in horrible and you know, sinful and dastardly ways.
Yeah, it's reflected even in the I've just noticed actually, now when you say like the Catholic Church thing and like the scoundrel thing, it's either reflected in the stats you give them, because the priest's main stat is convince, like, and that's what the Catholic Church did. It convinced you that like, yeah, this is how things are supposed to be, even when they were terrible. And like the scoundrels moved from place to place trying to find their riches. The artisans are tinkering with stuff and maybe not that they shouldn't do, and the alchemists are analyzing anything. So like I feel as if actually, now that I'm going back over it, I'm like, oh no, that's really clever. Like I feel like I was really dumb in the first read through. Like,
I mean, you kind of go over and you play a game like multiple ways, and you know, you understand different bits about it each time. I mean, one of the things with the priest, I feel like the priest is kind of the best example of this. Maybe because the church is the institution that was the easiest to criticize. But one of the advantages you can take is indulgence, where like when you roll to clear your sins as a priest, you can re-roll any ones. Basically, you can indulge your sins more efficiently as a priest than you can as like any other character. And again, with the scoundrel, I really wanted to kind of get this idea of like a desperate person doing desperate things. So one of the advantages is like not today, where basically if you
I think I took that one.
Desperate odds, you can push yourself, and cunning action, which is basically like you get a bonus to run away and like leave all your friends behind.
Yeah, I so how I played it is like the first thing we did in that cityscape is we found the dude in the shoe, the priest in the shoe boat. And basically there was loads of nobles with like sabers and everything. So my guy literally just walked up behind one of the guys, took his sword and killed the priest dude, and was like, we getting on? And everyone was like, can you sail? And obviously the scoundrels are like the dregs of society, so they weren't educated. So he was like, no, like of course not. One if you can, right? So like he just, that idea of like unfermented chaos from these people who have just been let down by society. Like I kind of tried to play it that way. So I do think that yes, I got it right. So yeah. So obviously you've got this like I keep saying Cthulhu-esque because that seems to be the hang word at the moment for weird. Like if anything's weird, everybody goes it's Cthulhu-esque. Like especially in like video games and tabletop RPGs. So you've got the follower for what inspired that like menace and that like chase mechanic rather than say, pardon me, your standard sword and sorcery or standard like we're just going through this? Why that chase mechanic?
I love a cosmic horror. I love horror. I love the idea of something that you don't really understand, but you know is much bigger than you, is right behind you. I love that. It's something that I play up all the time in the games that I GM. It's something that as a GM I love to draw on because there's so much you can do with it. But it's also, again, it's a game about the end of the world, and the world ending, or people thinking the world ending, it looks like a number of different ways. It looks like things that you thought you knew to be true you no longer know them to be true. But I love the idea of kind of this doom slowly catching up with you, and you know it's coming, and you can keep fleeing, but you know that eventually it will catch up and everything will change. Again, kind of a metaphor for the death agony of feudalism, as well as being like an external cosmic horror. It's supposed to say multiple things to multiple people.
Yeah, a lot of your games, the two games that I've got, a lot of it is like this almost interpretive, like forge your own connection to it sort of media, which I think is really powerful. So the last thing I kind of want to do about Hieronymus, because I think that people should definitely play it. I think it's one of those games that's easy to prepare for. You just throw it out there. Like we've got like an hour or two. We managed to do it in an hour because again, we're going to talk about the story where we got the rule wrong, but we did it in an hour, and it's a really fun, just little like some of the flavor text on the hexes that you've given are like stellar. Like, and one of the things that Ben did with us is like he would throw them towards us and say, well, what are they? I think one of them was like, there was people arguing. He says, what are they arguing about to us? And I think the first thing that came up was like, there's a ladder at the side of the building. So I said, they're arguing about which way of a ladder is up. Like so which way of a ladder goes up? Like, and like the other character tried to like show that it doesn't matter, but actually it did, because when he went down the other way by turning it round, he went back upwards, like, and stuff like that. So our GM used that inspiration of like both the painting. There's just so much like creative, like I use this word all the time, stimuli. That's the word I'm looking for. There's so many creative stimuli. So we got a rule wrong in our playthrough. We thought that when you went through a worldscape, once you finish a worldscape, you rolled like the follower dice, and that gave you that many ticks of the clock. And the clock's quite. We were saying that the clock was quite small, but now that we realise that that's not how the rule works, we're like we get it now. So it was pretty cool. But you've released an errata about that, you were telling me. So what's the errata about our cock up? What have you had to spell out for the dumb people in the room, and all the smart people are there like putting their hands in their heads?
So it initially said, I think, roll a d6 and you remove that number of ticks from the follower clock. Obviously, that can be read two ways, I later realized, because you can remove ticks by like ticking the clock and then you have fewer ticks left. Yeah. So now it's reduce the number of ticks on the follower clock by the number that you rolled, which is slightly more specific phrasing, I think.
Yeah.
And hopefully that will prevent any confusion. But yeah, I mean, I love listening to, because I know Ben made a video about like your experiences playing the game, and I love listening to it because I felt like you guys really, like, I was watching the video, I was like, this guy really gets it. Like,
and then that last bit, and you were like, what? Like, you really got it to that point.
When I read the last bit, I was like, maybe I should have play tested this game. You know?
Did you not play test it?
I didn't play test it because I know, I probably shouldn't be admitting this on a podcast. I do play test my games, but not when I know that the rules work.
Oh yeah, because if it's Forged in the Dark, everybody knows that Forged in the Dark works. So, and like, to be honest with you, the fact that it did work so well and you hadn't play tested it is not just a testament to Forged in the Dark system, but to your game creation, surely. Like, that's a pretty
well,
at the risk of being crass and somewhat like that's some big dick energy right there. Like, that's like, yeah, this will be fine. Like, put it out there. Like,
well, yeah, I remember there was like I know you want to get onto Lichcraft, so I don't want to talk too much about Hieronymus, but at the time when I was releasing it, there was a lot of talk in the RPG community about how important playtesting is. And it's a more in the indie community, and I don't want to go over Twitter discourse of past months, but that there was a lot of really, I think, interesting discussion about playtesting and the role that it plays. Because what I wanted from Hieronymus was not to pioneer a new set of rules. I know the rules of, I know the Forged in the Dark engine, I guess you would say. I know that those games work. I know that resolution mechanic really well. What I wanted was to make people look at the art, because a Hieronymous Bosch painting, you look at it and you're like, what is going on? You put a hex over it, and you're kind of forcing people to look at the different bits of art. Like, it focuses the eye in it. It encourages people to look at it in a new way. So I wanted that, and I wanted to make people feel a certain type of way. I wanted to provide these tools for GMs, and those, you can't playtest that. That's something you have to discuss with people. You have to kind of really think about it. You've got to take long showers and think about the way you want the game to feel, rather than crunchy mechanics. There's no crunch in Hieronymus.
No, it's so simple, and like, I get that you wanted to, by the sounds of things, you just wanted people to experience it and then talk about their experiences rather than go, this is months of playtesting, we've tried every single route, like, rah, rah, rah. No, you wanted people to go, oh shit, this happened when we played this route and we went through these hexes and sort of thing, and like, we saw these bits of the paintings, and like, have you noticed that bit's in the corner, like that weird bit in the corner, like, so no, that's a really cool, and I think Hieronymus is really cool for that. So if you can pick up Hieronymus, I do recommend, like, now that we've got some clarity, and I do recommend it. It is interesting, but actually, I like Hieronymus, don't get me wrong, but I think Lichcraft, this is your second outing as a designer, they've just recently kickstarted, is like one of it's like one of my favorite things for a lot of different reasons. Like, I'm going to be honest and say I do not know a lot about I do know a lot about it as an ally and stuff, but I do not know a lot about the trans struggle and the process and like the things that happen on that journey. But like, I feel as though, like, even though it's like drenched in satire and like this idea of like it's different for everybody and like the journey's different for everybody, that this is a very eye-opening game. So let's talk about Lichcraft and the story you want to tell with that as well. So, why transgender necromancers? Let's start there.
Well, Lichcraft is that, it's my second kind of big project. Like, I kickstarted it and everything, but it was actually the first game I ever wrote. Because I was looking at that. There's like these things called game jams on Itch, where basically like someone puts up like a prompt on Itch.io and everyone makes a game for it. And I was looking at this like queer undead jam which is about like making undead queer characters, and it was for Halloween. And I was kind of thinking, like, this seems really up my street, and I've never designed a proper game before. I got really into, I played like a lot of sixth edition by Bats, which I've already plugged. You're welcome, Bats. But I wanted to design something, so I kind of had a think, and I like made a brainstorm in my notebook, and there were kind of two. It was either gonna be like zombie gay kids who were like struggling to come out to their parents about either being zombies or being gay, and like it was going to be basically a sort of kind of comedy of errors sort of situation, powered by the apocalypse-esque probably. Or then I thought, you know what's really fucking me off at the moment? Being on an NHS waiting list for 5 years. You know what was funny? And this kind of idea came basically into my head. Like, yeah, what if people are on an NHS waiting list waiting for healthcare, and the waiting list is 300 years long, and they decide that they're going to become necromancers and turn into liches instead. Like, it was weird. It just kind of, it was one of those things where it's like, yeah, that sounds like a fun game. That sounds like something I'd play.
So this podcast is audio only, so you won't see our visuals. But for anybody who's missing out, is they're watching me smile from ear to ear because I just find this so funny. Like, and I don't know if it's a British thing where we're like so British people, the stereotype is we know how to queue. We know how to queue. Like, we queue for everything. We let people go in the queue most of the time, sort of thing. So the fact that this game is like trying to like just circumvent that is like the best bit of like, and it's set in England, in London, or England in general. Like, it's just like such a subversion that it's almost like unhomely or unheimlich, like that idea of like, oh my god, but they don't want to queue, they don't want to wait, they don't. So yeah.
One of the things was, I initially had it in my head, like, they want to become immortal so that they can wait on that waiting list for 300 years and not die. So like, they're like following all of the rules, but it's almost like, oh, what's it called? Like malicious compliance, basically.
It's the most British way of dealing with anything ever. Like, that idea of like, we're gonna circumvent the queue by being spiteful and somehow still staying in the queue. like
yeah. And then I realized, like, obviously, if you become a lich, you've kind of circumvented the whole like limitations of the physical body anyway thing. But it's still, it really, I think it's a very British game. I'm surprised that so many, like, a lot of I think 3/4 of my backers on Kickstarter for this project were Americans. And I was really interested by that, because I was like, this doesn't feel like, maybe this is a stereotype here, but this feels like very British humor. So it was interesting that maybe it's not just a British thing after all.
Maybe not, actually. When like, I think the humor definitely is, but I think maybe it's the experience, that idea of like, this is telling a story that is universal, and it's our story, and like you contain two very beautiful notes, I think, at the beginning of Lichcraft, which is one that identifies yourself as a trans person, and the fact that you've been waiting for your journey, not to start, but to reach the next levels and stuff like that. You realize that no trans experience is the same, and then you go on and say, like, and you don't have to be trans to do this, like, to play this game. It's not like, but it could be it, and it is very enlightening. I think it's something that I think it's a story that needs to be told, and I think that's why a lot of people have resonated to it. So I applaud you for telling this weird and wonderful story, because it is weird. Like, we're gonna be British about it and tell it how it is, but it is also wonderful. And the fact that you, as a trans creator, have created this thing for the trans and queer community, to rally around and have something that represents them. Because, admittedly, as a 28-year-old cis white guy, like, I am represented. Like, I get my fantasy fill. Like, Aragorn exists. Like, like, I get that. So I think for people who are on the margins and the fringes, it's a really beautiful way to bring them into the fold and to like have them have that representation. And maybe because I think this could also be educational. Like I looking at it from a teacher's point of view. Like I'm like, this is like really like it's all blown like and hyperbolic, but like no, this is a thing. Like people have to wait and like and that feeling is different, and like they know at different times, and they get that feeling from different things. It's like I kind of like how almost like the trans and like queer experience is like mimicked in the way powers work in this. Like I get my powers from my bloodline, like or something like that. And sometimes in that feeling of like sexuality and stuff, it comes from like different places. Like it comes from I fell in love with a boy when I was really young, or it's like I find both attractive, or the environment around me never allowed me to have that. So yeah, it's really really cool. So you say it was based on Sixth Edition and Forged in the Dark. So how would you like say those systems bleed in? Because I see like the harsh lessons bit on the character sheet, which I also think is a great like it's almost like a note thing for like things that have happened to your character, like, and that will affect them for like the rest of their journey, sort of thing. What bits of those systems bled into this, and why did you choose those systems rather than say the Black Hack or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, 6E I played was the first like indie game that I played. First, actually, not quite the first non D&D RPG that I played, but like getting close to it. And what I really loved about it is that it has this beautiful kind of, I don't remember exactly how John puts it, but it says like you can roll strength for like emotional strength. You can roll like charisma. You can roll charm or dexterity or wisdom for anything if you can argue it. If you want to like shoot something, you can roll with your wisdom stat if you're saying like I'm like weighing up the target. I'm like looking at it. And that idea of stats as not quite being, I don't know how best to like explain this. Not quite being like completely defined, but having like almost fuzzy edges. And in sixth edition, you actually change your stat every time you succeed a roll. You rename your stat to whatever it was that you succeeded in. The idea is that stats being like you have a number, but the quality of the stat is fuzzy. That to me was really like attractive. It does so much. It means these characters can kind of like bend and they can almost change and grow. So that was something that really inspired me. The thing I love about Forged in the Dark is rolling a big pile of D6s. So I kind of figure out how to kind of meld those two things into a game.
Yeah, we recently played Blades in the Dark, and I played the Cutter. So I was our big, and my skirmish rolls with help and with certain things ended up becoming like 7d6s. It was like the best thing, and it's like I'll take 7d6s, please, DM. Like what? Like yeah. Do you think that the fact that the stats are like fuzzy and everything also represents like is it almost like representative of the story you're telling as well, because of the fact that physically these people are kind of, I don't want to say fuzzy because that's like almost belittling, but I hope you understand what I mean. Like the idea that they are changing and they are growing into like this thing and going on this journey in which they will change, like or get to where they want to be. Because actually change is incorrect, because if they've always been that way, I hope you know what I mean. Like
that's really interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way before, and I think like I don't know if this is specific to like the trans experience, although like Lichcraft is about waiting for healthcare, which like billions of people don't have access to the right healthcare. That's not something that's exclusive to trans people. Whoever it applies to. But sorry, that was a bit of a tangent. But it's more, I want the characters in the RPGs I design to be individuals who are like learning and growing and doing things, and they're like adapting what they know they can do to various circumstances. I don't want them to be like a big pile of abilities with a name.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
I want to like really, and I think a lot of a lot of indie RPGs do this. A lot of indie RPGs don't do this. Neither is like the wrong approach. Like there's differences which depend on the kind of game you want to play. But I want these characters to sort of. I like fiction first. I want them to say what they're doing and then figure out what stat that they're rolling with and things like that. And I feel like that reflects that I want to highlight these people are unique individuals who are acting in unique ways. So I think that's why I quite like the kind of stat system that was come up with.
Yeah, no, I get that. There's definitely a way of like, because with the scene thing as well, how it's broken into scenes, and yeah, your obvious preference for story and personality over maths is very apparent. One of the things I did want to ask is, one of the interesting things about Lichcraft is you say in it that it is actually built for 2 players, like originally in its base form. It's built for a GM and 1 person. Now I find that odd, because obviously coming from a traditional like tabletop RPG background in terms of like D&D and like Pathfinder, now Forged in the Dark and stuff like that. Why? Like, it's just I feel as if that's a very strange thing to choose. It's like, so why did you want that?
Well, I mean, part of it is because I wrote it in lockdown, and like I wanted to be my partner. And a lot of people are alone with one other person, and I wanted to give them a game that was built for them. And you lose something when you're not face to face, when you're not speaking to people. A part of the conversation that you could be having is kind of dissolved, and I wanted people to be able to have that. So I deliberately designed something that could be played with 2 people, that could be played as a duet game, and because it's not a numbers game. It's about story, and there's not really such thing as balance in Lichcraft at all.
No.
Like that, you don't need to balance it. So you can play with as many people as you want, and it doesn't really change the balance. But what it does change is kind of like the vibe. Like when I played it with 3 friends, with one of my friends GMing, we had this like incredibly like wild, zany, like satirical adventure where we ended up like fighting a Draco Lich that was also like someone's ex, like on top of a ziggurat in the middle of a music festival. And it was really jokey and really funny. And we had like a huge amount of fun, and it was very gratifying. But then when you play it with one other person, it becomes more personal. And sometimes that's you can sit down and have these conversations about your own identity and your own experience whilst like exploring these characters. And I sometimes feel that that's easier to do with just one other person there. So that's kind of the idea of saying, and me saying it was designed as a duet. I really wanted to foreground that, because otherwise I don't think anyone would ever think about playing it as a duet game.
Okay.
It absolutely works for any group size. I haven't tried it as a solo game. I don't know if it will work as a solo game. But yeah, the duet is the form where you have a slightly different conversation than you have with the bigger groups.
Oh yeah,
and
totally.
I like that.
I get that a lot, because like you can have those more like you said, more intimate conversations. Whereas you're a member of a group, so you're expected to like ham things up when you're a member of a group, like a party. But when it's your story, when it's your story, like you take things a bit more seriously, because it's yours. And like we said, with RPGs, we insert ourselves in. It's never happening to our character; it's happening to us. So like we can use that as a really interesting way to do things. Because I got like, it has the potential to go like a few ways. Like it has like the potential to go like fantasy girls, like the like or what's the thing that's on now? There's a show that's on now that's about the AIDS epidemic.
Oh,
Like,
it's
a sin or it's a crime, yeah.
sin, yeah.
It has the potential to do that, where you got like these teenagers messing with it. But then I feel as though if you were to do it one-on-one, you might choose like an older character who's coming into that like later on in life, who's already had like those, like they might have already had children, so one of the scenes might be that they have to go explain it to their children, like, and so you can have like a real like dramatic. So yeah, I think I just love it. I love the fact that it's so satirical. Like the Tories don't even hold elections anymore because people just keep voting them in, even when they do a terrible job, which is like so true to life. It hurts. Scotland's become a nuclear wasteland, apparently, question mark, like, because we've gone back to like this idea of like the wall almost. Like we don't talk about Scotland. Because maybe it's gone for independence finally or something. Like there's loads of like little Britishisms that I love about it. Like also the fact like even how you write some of the rules, like where is it? I can't remember. You say something like you can do whatever you want, but these are the two aspects that are true. They are trans and they are on a waiting list. Like, and I'm like, no, that's how we do things. Like, you can do anything you want. However, like, so yeah, I love. It's one of my character creation is one of my favorite things as well. Like this idea of like I am a communist or whatever my hobby is, like just these little weird things that you then put into like this story, this preamble.
And what I tried to make it so that everything you choose about your character, you're then like playing with that, because all like you choose your day job and that gives you a bonus to any role. Like if you're like as long as you can justify it. Like if you're an accountant and you're like trying to cast a spell, you can just say, well, like I'm really good at maths and this is a spell about maths, so I guess like I'm gonna get an extra dice to that. I had a friend when I did playtest this one. When I was playtesting it, she had her like hobby as being a baker, and she cast all her spells like using a sourdough starter. So she was really like playing the system for extra dice, and it's that kind of nothing about the character is just flavor or just mechanics. The character is a whole person, and that was kind of the goal of character creation there.
Yeah, and I like the fact that there's like this free scene system where you play out a scene and each one's to get like a component of the ritual to make you into a lich. I like the I kind of like the sacrifices thing mechanic. I thought that was like really interesting, the fact that you can like sacrifice like really important things, but that have no tangible worth. So like one of the sacrifices you can make to like save your life is your sense of independence, and you're like, oh shit, like that's like really big. Like that's like really big. But if you want to live and you want to go through something like as important as this, like you might have to do that. And there's like it's that idea of that there's loads of this like dry satirical like British humor oozing over these like hard hitting like, but the truth is though this is true. Like and I fucking love that. It's so good. Yeah.
I mean, the sacrifice mechanic, it really plays into that mechanic of that idea of like, what will you do to achieve your goals? What will you do for power? Because when people are like pursuing, like when someone is pursuing a big goal, like it doesn't just affect them, it affects like their family relationships, it affects like their job and their career, and again, like that's almost, it's like a TV show or like a soap opera trope, right? Where someone gets like a big ambition and everyone around them is kind of going like, well, what the fuck's going on here? And they're kind of like giving up and like throwing their whole life under the bus to get this. That's like quite a hard-hitting trope. But it also is interesting because, well, oh yeah, I'll write that I lost my sense of independence on a character sheet. Fine. Interesting what players will give up for their characters. Whereas, like, you know, in like going back to D&D, like I noticed some of my players would rather pledge their firstborn than take like a permanent -2 to AC. Like they will always prefer like a narrative sacrifice, even though it's much bigger. And I thought that would be an interesting thing to kind of explore. And then at the end, like one of the questions you have to answer is like, are you actually proud of yourself? Like, are you proud of what you've done to achieve this? Really, though.
Yeah, like that. I was going to come on to that and then say like the completing the ritual bit is like, pick 3 questions from the list and answer them to describe what the ritual looks like for the GM. But then there's like, answer it to complete casting the spell. So for you to do what you've been playing this whole game for, so this could be the last 2 or 3 hours you've been playing this now, and, or maybe it's a campaign because the scenes you've managed to make the scenes longer or something, or you've extended the ritual somehow, right? And then to finish, you have to ask these questions. And it's like, are you proud? Have you fulfilled your political beliefs? Like, have you done what you meant to do? Like, and it's like, oh shit, because you also have that feeling of like, if I answer these wrong, was it work? Does it not work? Like, and it doesn't really say that that's the case, but like there's that almost risk factor. Like, what if I answer these wrong, or if I'm not satisfied and it doesn't work? Like, and like, it's just like, because even I like the way the questions go from are you proud, and then the last question is, do you really want to become a lich? Like, is that really what you want, or do you just want to be able to have the body that you want, like that you deserve and you need, sort of thing? And I think that's it's again that idea of satire that hits home when you take a step back and you go, oh shit, it's just so clever. You're probably gonna be like, haha, like please keep telling me that I'm clever, but you like, I feel as if both your games, Laurie, are like ridiculously like clever and nuanced and like so rich in their ideas. So the third thing I wanted to talk to you about, now that we've talked about both games, is that both games tell stories that are weird, but I think are very important. And we've kind of touched on it a little bit as we've talked about both games. So obviously Hieronymus talks about like the idea of sin and when things change in our lives, like the institution and stuff like that we're in. So COVID for modern day, but feudalism back then. Lichcraft talks about the trans journey and what people will do in order to get there and stuff like that, and like asking yourself hard questions about like yourself and what you want to do. So you have like some really interesting stories that you tell through your games. The question I want to ask you is, these stories, are they really important for people to tell? And the obvious answer is yes. Like in my case, and maybe I'm guessing your case as well. But so then our question evolves into, why are they really important? These weird and wacky stories that we're telling, why are they really important? Like, so you can ponder that one for a bit, because I know that's a big question. Like, we can both stroke our chins. Like,
it's an interesting one, right? Because there's no RPG that tells a story that's like unimportant, right? Because like every time you sit down with your friends and you start talking about what you're gonna do and what kind of like life you're gonna live out, you're exploring something which in some way is important to you as an individual and as a group, even if it's just like beating a dungeon, right? Like that's not an unimportant story. Like
No.
you're enjoying yourself, and you're doing something that you never would otherwise have the chance to do, and that in itself is interesting. But one of the things that I've often said about my games is like a lot of people are doing a lot of people who are way more smart than me are doing really interesting things with like game mechanics, and that's not me. I'm trying to get people to think about the world that they live in, or not. That sounds pretentious, but I'm trying to get people to have a certain kind of experience, or to acknowledge a certain kind of experience that they're happening. Like with Hieronymus, I want people to experience that. Well, I want people to understand that they're experiencing that fear, right? That fear of the unknown, that fear of collapse, that fear of something behind you. You don't quite know what's coming, and you know eventually you're going to kind of like fuck up and fall down eventually. That's a fear that everyone has, but this is not the first time that anyone has felt that. This is it's a very uniquely like human thing to experience, and by putting it in the context of like medieval art, we can kind of see, we can almost relate to the experiences of these people like centuries ago, and I think that's important. I think it's, in a way, it's reassuring. That was kind of what I was trying to get at with Hieronymus. Also, I just really wanted to get people to look at the art because it's so beautiful.
Yeah, I will say that like the chaotic nature of the art reflects the chaotic nature of the world, because obviously art imitates life, but like it is like morbidly beautiful. Like some of the scenes in it are like I wouldn't say grotesque, but they're horrific, and you're like, oh, but then you're like, I can't stop staring at it. Like it's so yeah. There's that, and then the story in Lichcraft, I think, is kind of the. I'm not gonna say the same thing, like because where art imitates life, but how I feel about it anyway is that like the fact that people have easier access to becoming liches than to be themselves, like, is scary. Like, and because we like it, like people will become the bad guy on Twitter because they can't accept who they are and stuff like that, and do terrible things because they can't accept who they are. And it's just like, wow, like it's a madness. It actually blows my mind how like clever these games are. Like, as a thinker.
And in a way, they're kind of, I mean, I don't want to say like the games aren't, I guess they're not like clever on their own. They're drawing on people's own like emotions and understanding of the world. And that's what makes them good games. Like it's not in the writing. I'm not writing books about the experience precisely because I don't feel like I really have the words to express and sum up those experiences. So I want to give people the tools to tell that themselves. And Lichcraft is, like, I know I joked at the beginning, like, yeah, there's a very strong through line in my games, but actually there kind of is, because they're both about a world that is overwhelmingly ridiculous.
Yeah.
And the things in it don't make sense. And it, and it hurts people. But Lichcraft is very different from Hieronymus, because in Lichcraft you're meant to win. You are meant to achieve your goals. And that's like, as a trans person, there's a little bit of that RPG power fantasy, which some people say is a bad thing. I personally think there's nothing wrong with a bit of power fantasy in RPG. That's fundamentally, Lichcraft is the trope of the RPG characters that can do anything and can be powerful and they can achieve what they want. And if you're someone who feels powerless, that story is for you. It's for you to like play out that power fantasy and achieve your goals.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, you said about the fact that you're drawing on people's feelings. I think that's the clever thing about it, is the fact that you make every single person who plays this game have an individual connection to the issue. and you're not telling them how to feel about it. They feel that way, and it just so happens to align with what you were trying to say. Like it's not like when I read Lichcraft again as like a cis white man, like I read it and I was like, fuck. Like I had no idea how this was, but then I went, shit. Like I've been all right. I've had an all right time. Like of things, and then with Hieronymus, now that thinking about it now, like yeah, that idea of like things collapse, and like I do find it interesting that you brought up the difference in that in Hieronymus you're supposed to fail, like there's like that inevitability of failure, but in Lichcraft you're supposed to win. Do you think that's and obviously if you can say like you don't really know or you don't really want to tell me, but do you think that's because of your personal beliefs? Like obviously as a trans person you want people to be able to win in this journey, like you want that for them, whereas unfortunately in terms of the subject matter of Hieronymus, like it's kind of just an inevitability, like the end is inevitable, like sort of thing. Is that what you think it is, or is it something else? Am I trying to play like 5D chess when you're just trying to play checkers?
No, I think there are reasons. I think they're, as you pointed out, they're like quite genre specific, right? Lichcraft is almost like this power fantasy genre. It's this like achieving your aims, and like I also feel that, you know, as a trans person, there's so much media about trans people not getting what they want. And LGBT people dying being such like a common trope in media as well. You know, there's the Vasquez always dies trope, right? And that, and I didn't want that to be my game. But with Hieronymus, you're supposed to lose because it's a world historical fact that feudalism loses, like feudalism collapses. But there is always a but, because the end of feudalism wasn't the end of the world. And that's why I kind of put in Hieronymus, when the follower catches up to you, you need to decide what that looks like, because it may end the world as we know it, but it didn't actually end the world.
No, it just felt that way. It was like the sky is falling in Chicken Little, wasn't it? Like
and in a way, like that's almost like an optimistic message for people who feel that the end of the world is happening now. Maybe it's not. Maybe something else is changing, but that doesn't mean that, you know, everything is lost. But it's almost, it is. You're right. It's the subject matter that creates the different goals.
The last thing I want to talk to you about before we do like the deck of many questions, we do our outros, is something that might hit close to home, but it's a really important topic that I want to talk to more people about, because I'm going to be brutally honest and say it's something that pisses me off on Twitter. And I get it, Twitter's not the best place to be sometimes when you're in certain headspaces. I do want to talk about things like representation and stuff like that with you as a trans person. And myself as someone who's not neurotypical, so I haven't said this to you yet, so you might notice that I'm a bit odd, and like as I've been on camera, I've like been like looking around and stuff because I'm autistic. So like representation gets kind of like a bad rap from like people in the tabletop RPG community, usually the older generation, the vanguard of like an age where this was our hobby. Being a nerd wasn't cool, like rah rah rah. What are your opinions on like representation? Because I think it's really important, and I think like things like the combat wheelchair in D&D, which is a fucking phenomenal bit of kit. Yeah, maybe you could argue that there shouldn't have had to be rules made for that. That should have just been allowed, like sort of thing. And that would probably be my only argument against it. Like, I don't feel as if there should have been rules. Like, people should have just been allowed to be in wheelchairs. Like, that should, like, fine. But how do you feel about like how representation is being dealt with in the tabletop RPG community at the moment?
So it's a contradiction, really, because there's things that are very good and there's things that are very bad, right? There's there is like, I feel like the combat wheelchair is kind of like epitomize like all of the things that are really toxic about the community in general, like particularly D&D, but it's not only, it's not just specific to D&D, where like you look through like the person that made the combat wheelchair, like you look through her Twitter replies, and there's so many people like complaining about it, and it's like, well, maybe this wasn't for you. Maybe people should just be able to tell the stories that they want. And the reason why there being a rule set for the combat wheelchair is important isn't necessarily because people in wheelchairs are like, oh, goddamn, I need a rule set for this. Because actually, like, I know a lot of people that have played like characters with various disabilities, and have never needed a rule set for it. They've just kind of played it, they've homebrewed it. But because it makes visible that you are allowed to play those characters, and you don't see in D&D art, you don't see people in a wheelchair in the art of D&D.
That's a good point, actually. Like the fact that the rule set is literally, well, it's not literally, sorry, that's derogative. Like, but it is there to show like this is a thing, this can happen. Like it's almost like a beacon towards that thing. I get that. That's a really good point. Thank you.
Yeah, and because it's like, if you write rules for something, you're saying this is something that happens in the game. It's why, like, there's a reason why so much of D&D is combat rules. It's because D&D, a lot of D&D is combat. You're spending like 2 hours of every session doing combat. Or, that's how the game was initially written. Obviously, everyone plays it differently. But that's, rules draw a beacon to how people are going to play. And so
it's allowed. It's allowed, yeah.
Yeah, so that's why I think, that's why the rule set for the combat wheelchair is important. But I will say also, like, as a trans game designer, I want to highlight other trans voices, but I also want to look at people on their own merits. I don't like to like put out calls and say I'm only looking for a trans person, because I do want to like hear what everyone has to say, and sometimes I feel like it can come off a little bit patronizing. There's a difference between representation because you really want to represent someone and you really want to make their voices heard, and representation because you want to say you had trans workers working on your project in a Twitter thread.
Yeah, definitely. I did want to talk about something about this in terms of my personal experience as an autistic person, in terms of so there was I believe in like that identity politics can be a bit reductive personally. Like I personally do not give a damn about anything that signifies who you are as a person. Just the person you are is what I care about. So like if you're trans and you're an asshole to me, I'm going to treat you as if you were a cis person and an asshole. Like that doesn't change my, and so I do think sometimes it can be reductive, and I do think that you're right, that that's because people use it for that thing. And I think one of the biggest examples that really upset me, and me and my friend who used to do this podcast before talked about it, and I was genuinely upset about it, was someone like wrote autism rules, and like they were so like reductive, and they did the whole like, oh, not everybody's experience is the same, but basically you just had a stress meter, and like eventually you're gonna wig out, and you're just gonna do it because you will, because things will get stressful and people will move things and you won't like it because you're autistic. I'm like, I actually spent like years like working on this, and like for the first time in a long time I looked at that and I went, is this how people see me? And like felt like almost at like the back of the classroom again in like the special needs class, like, is this how people see me now, isn't it? Like, and it was very strange. So I think your idea of like representation for representation's sake versus genuine representation is really important, and I totally agree with that, Laurie. So like, thank you very much. So I know that's a hard topic. Like, you talk to people about that and they really don't want to talk about it because they're like, I'm going to say the wrong thing. But like, I appreciate your honesty on that one. That's really helpful, because Yeah. Sorry, you go first.
It's really a minefield, but I do think a lot of people feel the same way, because like what it is ultimately is people need to see themselves, and they don't need to see like a stereotype of themselves, or they don't need to see kind of a version of what people think that they are that actually has nothing to do with them and is just there for advertising. And it's not, I don't think it's really, obviously, like when people are writing games, you make mistakes,
Yeah.
but I just think there's a lot of work that still needs to be done in terms of the community, in terms of approaching these issues in a way that like really does represent like diverse creators and like people of color. There need to be more games written by people of color about those experiences. There need to be more games written by trans people. There really needs to be more games written by and for like neurodiverse people and about like those kinds of experiences as well. But we're not tokens, and we're not just our gender or our disability or our race. We're much more than that. We're individuals, and you can't just reduce someone to that and say like, oh, a trans person worked on this game, so it represents trans people. That is not the case. There are plenty of trans people who don't represent me, or who I disagree with. So there's still like a long way to go, I think, in that, and we'll only get there in RPGs when we get there in the rest of society.
Yeah, definitely. Like, and especially with like how whiplash politics have been for the last like decade, like those whiplash changes of like momentum for like rights movements and stuff like that, and where we've made loads of steps forward and they've gone backwards suddenly and stuff like that. I feel as if until we can make them steady, incremental, like checkpoints that we can't fall back past, if that makes sense, then we will have true representation that represents not just the stereotype, but the range, and that we won't have to be reductive anymore. It won't even matter. Like, okay, you want to play a trans character, cool. They're just a person, like, and that's cool, and that's fine, and that's that. I'm really glad that, because sometimes I feel alone in that. I feel like that want to not have to identify everything. Feel alone in that, whereas to talk to you and have that same sort of connection is quite cool. So thank you for your insight, and thank you for your games that are amazing and I love because they're so clever. So the last thing I want to do with you before we go and you can do all your plugs and stuff is we have this thing called the deck of many questions, which is a randomly we've got a list of questions. There's a lot of them, and some of them are like gross, like if you had to sleep with one thing in the monster manual, what would you do? And some of them are like really serious, like what's the deepest thing you've ever learned from Dungeons and Dragons or a tabletop RPG session? Like they're just like little things. So I was wondering if you would do one of those for us, and then we'd leave and say goodbye, because it's you want to go to bed and speak to your partner. I want to go to bed and speak to my partner. So the deck of many questions. Let's have a look. So, Laurie, will you choose a number between 1 and, when it decides that it's loaded, 1 and you can roll for it if you would like.
I'm literally grabbing this out.
1 and 6. No, it's not 69, even though that would have been hilarious. 1 and 75. Would you please roll a number between 1 and 75?
Let's roll some percentile dice, and then if it's 41.
41. So, hang on, it's gone back. So 41 is. Have you ever regretted starting a campaign, even if it turned out well?
Oh, oh man, that's a delicate one.
They are, some of them are like hot, like
Yeah.
on the Nando's scale, they're like extra hot. Like that's a very British reference. I hope that people like get that. Like,
That's a hard one because we all have moments where we regret starting a campaign when we're like prepping frantically at the last minute and we don't have time. I have, since my first campaign that I ever ran, which I very much regretted the way I set it up, because I don't think, like, I basically didn't do a very good job of setting it up, and we still had fun, but there were lots of things I wasn't satisfied with. I made a policy of basically running short campaigns, like mini campaigns, rather than like huge D&D campaigns of like 50 arcs, precisely to avoid that kind of regret. And I only have one long-term campaign, and it's my Blades in the Dark campaign, which I absolutely don't regret starting because I've learned so much playing it.
Blades in the Dark is one of those games where you just play it and you just love it. Like, you just love playing it. It's so cinematic. You can do so much cool stuff. And
it's a game.
The fact that I was able to play, so my character in our Blades in the Dark campaign that we stream with Ben is like secretly the Prince of Scotland. Like, and we did that. Like,
that's so good.
Like, so everybody just thinks he's this thug, and they all thought he was this thug for ages. And then I basically started role playing like downtime actions where, oh yeah, I wash my hair and it's bright red, like, because one of the things for the Scotlands is that their hair's red. They're like ginger and like Irish, but I play them as Russian for some reason. Don't ask me why. I feel like they're very much like the white Russians from like the communists versus.
Yeah, they're the outsiders. So it's whatever voice you feel is the outsiders. I love that. My players are out to kill the immortal emperor.
Yeah.
And that was like our session 0 was like, we want to kill the immortal emperor, and I was like, well, okay then, that's going to take a few seasons to get there, I think, but you know, we probably will. But yeah, I mean, Blades, it's such a good system, and you can do so much with it.
Yeah. So, Laurie, thank you so much for coming on and talking to me about Weird and Wonderful Stories, your two wonderful products. Where can people find you on the internet? Tell them where they can talk to you, buy your stuff, all that jazz.
So you can find me at Laurie_EEE on Twitter. Be warned, there's politics on there. So if you do follow me, be careful, but please do anyway. And that's where I like kind of talk about RPGs and talk about my own projects and other people's projects that I really like. You can find me at Laurie O'Connel .itch.io, which is my itch storefront. This will be linked somewhere, I'm sure, because my name is quite hard to spell.
Yeah, I'll put all these in the description.
And yeah, Lichcraft and the Kickstarter has unfortunately ended, but when I do, you can still buy the PDF. And when I do print, they'll be available in various different shops. And Hieronymus is currently available also from my itch storefront. And I've recently updated it to make the graphics look really beautiful and make all the art more high res, because it has been printed in the UK and the US and is available in a number of different places in the UK and the US, which if you check out my Twitter, I should have a pinned post that explains all of that when I write one.
Oh, I'm really sorry. I totally forgot to mention the fact that Hieronymus had been like picked up and was going places. But thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for listening. It's been a real pleasure. I've been bricking it because I think Laurie's stuff is so clever. Like I really didn't want to sound like Monkey Boy. Like go, roll dice, go click clack. So yeah, I've really enjoyed it. So I hope you've enjoyed it too. I hope whoever you are, wherever you are, whenever you are safe, you're well, and that you'll come back next week to listen to us talk more about tabletop RPGs and other cool things on the internet. I've been Addison, your friendly favourite Furbolg. on the Pod of Many Things, and I'll see you in a bit. Bye.
Bye.